What's up, ego hackers? Welcome to the show. This is C.S. Joseph Podcast. I'm your host, C.S. Joseph. And today's question is, Chase, what does friendship mean to an SI user like you? What a great question. Thank you for asking this question. I'm very happy to have the opportunity to actually talk about myself, which I don't often very much do, actually. So regardless, let's get down to it. So I've been talking a lot about recently how there are bonds versus attachments. And attachments, and I mean literally all attachment, is ultimately unhealthy. All attachment is unhealthy. It should be avoided at all costs. And this is really hard for people to deal with because when they look at attachment, they're considering the, they're considering the, holy smokes, they are, wow, kind of brain farted there for a second there. So they're considering a book called Attached. There's this book that talks about different attachment styles, anxious attached styles, secure attachment styles, avoidant attachment styles, etc. And the reality of the situation is, due to these attachment styles that most people kind of cling on to, all of these attachment styles are ultimately unhealthy, and it causes a huge problem, especially when it comes to friendships or relationships. And honestly, they need to be entirely avoided. And the reason for that is because attachment is ultimately a one-way street relationship, where you are basically being drained from one person to another. You are being entirely drained. And that would be a really, really big deal. So you got to watch out for this. You got to watch out for that draining component and how that can be very detrimental to you and your relationships, especially as an SI user. But for me, it's even worse because my introverted sensing is introverted sensing inferior. And when you combine that with extroverted feeling child, you find yourself in oftentimes Stockholm syndrome based attachments where you have this abuser who is absorbing from you on a consistent basis, and they are draining you and not giving anything in return. Take, right? That's all it is. That's all it's about. And that too can become a major issue, right? A major issue. So with all that being said, it becomes a bigger and bigger problem over time. A much bigger problem. Attachment just leaves you entirely drained and you have nothing less. And then eventually, if you're an SI user, you're going to start realizing the abuse, and SI users end up becoming very bitter and end up holding a lot of grudges, basically. A lot of grudges. And this would be a serious, serious issue, the grudge. Because as an SI user, I often do hold grudges to people who have abused me when I actually finally figure out that they have been abusing me the entire time. And those grudges last a long time. It's even to the point where I will end up taking revenge against those people decades later. Now, that's not to say that I'm not all about forgiveness, because I will absolutely forgive. But the thing is, though, is that if they're consistently being my enemy and whatnot, and eventually the scale gets tipped in my favor, what's going to end up happening is things will end up blowing up. And that could be a really, really big deal. A very big deal. So, and that's something that just needs to ultimately be avoided. So, attachment ends up becoming the problem. Attachment is the bane of the introverted sensor's friendship or relationships. Because again, attachment is all about loyalty. This is one of the reasons why, when talking to women, for example, I do not allow myself to talk to women who basically give me photos of themselves, like naked photos, for example, because that creates unfair loyalty, right? And that unfair loyalty can continue to be a problem over and over and over. And that's not something I want in my life. I don't want to find myself unfairly loyal to someone, which is basically an attachment, and I find myself being taken advantage of this person at every single turn. And that's wrong. It's wrong. So what I have to do is I got to put up my boundaries and enforce those specific boundaries, right? And that can be a big issue. That can be a problem over time, right? So I always make sure that it's not me, and that, such that it's not me, that I just avoid that entirely. Instead, I have to have a personal standard of bonds. Bonds are two-way street relationships, where you receive as much as you give, or you receive more than you give, or sometimes you give more than you receive, but you have confidence that you'll receive later, basically. These are bonds, and this is what the cognitive origin of intimacy and connection is all about, especially for ESTPs and INFJs. From that point of view, they thrive and heavily desire bonds. Bonds are absolutely everything to those people. And you got to be aware of this. Everyone's got to be aware of this, these bonds, right? So what I would recommend, if you're an introverted sensor, take the time to actually notice the relationships you have. I mean, at least INFJs and ESTPs, they're interest-based, they have extroverted sensing, so they're able to cut people off when they need to be cut off. That's how that works. They definitely do the cutoffs. And the cutoffs are actually very healthy and very necessary. The problem is that SI users can get stuck in their own little loyalty complexes. And due to that loyalty complex, it ends up causing additional problems over time, like a lot of problems. So watch out for those loyalty complexes. It's very problematic. It is a very big deal. Those loyalty complexes end up causing some serious issues, right? So, because you end up getting stuck with abusers, you end up getting stuck with attachment, and introverted sensors have a really hard time letting go of attachment because they get comfortable in their situations. They get comfortable with abuse, and that's the main issue. It's really hard to maintain healthy friendships in that regard. So bonds are everything. Now, it's the ESTP and the INFJ's purpose to actually guide SI users to bonds and get away from attachment. This is why these two types are classically detached. But introverted sensors, especially ENTPs, we get attached a bit too easily. And that can be very problematic over time. I know this personally. It has bit me in my ass so many times throughout my life. And has been, and probably, it has been like ultimately the biggest bane of my own personal existence, to the point where I've lost my family multiple times over the fact that I allowed myself to get attached to the wrong people and also in the wrong situation. What people would call situationships, I guess. But it's still based on attachment. It wasn't a true bond. So if you're looking at a friendship as an SI user, if you're looking at a relationship as an SI user, you need to make sure that you are going out of your way, right, to not be attached. And instead, protect yourself from attachments and make sure it is bonds. You have to be willing to talk to other people about the quality of your relationships so that your relationships eventually, when you talk to your friends about it, they'll be like, oh yeah, that's really awesome. Oh yeah, that's really cool. And it gets down to the point where it's like, okay, these people are able to tell you from a third party point of view if it is an attachment or is it a bond. A two-way street. Because all relationships, be it sexual or friendship or otherwise, you guys need to make sure they are bonds and not attachments. Like it's critical. It's absolutely critical that you do this. So anyway, I've hammered this horse pretty hard. Thank you all for watching and listening, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.